I knew the moment would come, standing in that courtroom, watching my stepmother's perfectly maintained facade finally crack as the judge read the sentencing. 20 years for fraud, elder abuse, and falsifying legal documents. My father's will, the one she'd forged while he lay dying, clutched in my hands like the smoking gun it was. 3 years I'd waited for this moment, biding my time while she paraded around in my mother's jewelry, lived in my childhood home, and told everyone how my father had seen the light before passing. The bailiff called my name. "Ms. Elizabeth Bennet, would you like to read your victim impact statement?" I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my blazer, the one Dad bought me for my first real job interview. The courtroom fell silent as I approached the podium. My stepmother, Cynthia, glared at me with those cold blue eyes, the same eyes that had watched me at Dad's funeral, daring me to challenge her. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd crumble like I always had. But she didn't know what I had in my folder. She didn't know I had proof. She didn't know that her perfect crime had one fatal flaw: me. And I wasn't staying silent anymore. Dad was the quintessential self-made Midwestern transplant who'd built his construction business from scratch in suburban Connecticut. After Mom died of breast cancer when I was 14, it was just the two of us. Weekend fishing trips at Lake Candlewood, arguing over Yankees versus Red Sox games, and his awkward but earnest attempts at helping me shop for prom dresses. "Lizzie," he'd say, "your mother would have known what to do here, but we'll figure it out together." That was Dad, practical, honest, and unfailingly loyal, the kind of man who still balanced his checkbook by hand and considered a handshake as binding as any contract. Then Cynthia appeared when I was in college. She was everything Dad wasn't: polished, sophisticated, and worldly. A real estate agent who handled the sale of a commercial property for his business. 20 years his junior, with salon-perfect blonde hair and a laugh that somehow made everyone feel included in some private joke. "She makes me feel young again, Lizzie," Dad told me over Thanksgiving break my junior year. I smiled and nodded, ignoring the way she corrected his table manners or the slightly condescending tone when she explained wine pairings. The wedding was small, just months after they met. I stood as maid of honor, swallowing my reservations while Dad beamed. "Finally, some female energy back in the house," he joked. I was at Boston University by then, coming home less frequently, watching from a distance as Cynthia systematically renovated our family home, replacing Mom's carefully chosen farmhouse decor with sleek, modern furnishings. The summer after graduation, I visited for 2 weeks. Dad had planned a 4th of July barbecue, our family tradition, but Cynthia had other ideas. "We're doing a catered cocktail party instead," she announced. "The Blackwells and Porters will be there. They're connected to everyone in Fairfield County." "But Dad always does the grilling, his famous bourbon-glazed ribs." "Elizabeth," she cut me off, using my full name as she always did, "your father needs to network with people who matter, not stand over a hot grill serving processed meat on paper plates." Dad just shrugged apologetically. "Times change, kiddo." That night, as guests in linen suits and summer dresses mingled on our back patio, I found myself alone by the bar. Cynthia approached, champagne flute in hand. "You know, Elizabeth," she said quietly, "your father has worked very hard to provide for you. The least you could do is try to fit in with our new social circle. That sundress from Target isn't doing you any favors." I blushed furiously, suddenly aware of my discount store attire among designer labels. Dad saw us talking and came over, slinging an arm around me. "There's my 2 favorite ladies." Cynthia's smile never reached her eyes. I was just giving Elizabeth some fashion advice. First impressions matter in the real world. Dad's health began declining, heart problems, the same thing that took his father. Cynthia insisted on being his sole caretaker, limiting my visits to strictly scheduled hours, always with her hovering nearby. She'd installed cameras throughout the house for security purposes. 2 weeks before he died, Dad called me when Cynthia was at a spa appointment. Lizzie, his voice was weak but urgent. My lockbox in the garage, behind the Christmas decorations. There's a letter and some documents. Get them before. He started coughing violently, just as I heard Cynthia's car in the driveway. I have to go, honey. I love you. Remember what I said. The line went dead. I drove over immediately, but the house was locked and Cynthia wouldn't answer. When she finally called back, her voice was ice. Your father is resting. He's too fragile for visitors right now. I'll let you know when you can come. Dad died 3 days later. I never got to say goodbye. At the funeral, Cynthia was the picture of grief in designer black, accepting condolences from people I barely knew. When the lawyer read the will the following week, I sat stunned as he announced Dad had left everything to Cynthia. The house, the business, even Mom's jewelry collection he'd always promised would be mine. There must be some mistake, I stammered. No mistake, Cynthia said softly, reaching over to pat my hand. Your father and I discussed it thoroughly. He wanted me to manage everything and make provisions for you when appropriate. The lawyer, someone I'd never met despite Dad having the same attorney for decades, avoided eye contact as he handed me a check for $10,000, a pittance compared to Dad's actual worth. Be grateful, Cynthia whispered as we left. Your father was quite disappointed in some of your life choices. This is more than he initially wanted to leave you. I took the check and walked away, tears streaming down my face, remembering Dad's last words to me. The lockbox. Whatever was in it might be the only thing I had left of him now. That night, I drove back to Dad's house, Cynthia's house now, and parked down the street. The security code to the garage hadn't been changed. Dad had used my birthday for years. With shaking hands, I punched in the numbers and slipped inside, using my phone flashlight to navigate to the Christmas decorations in the far corner. Behind the dusty boxes of ornaments sat Dad's old metal lockbox. The key had always hung on his workbench, but it was gone now. I grabbed the box anyway and left, heart pounding as headlights swept the driveway, Cynthia returning from somewhere. At home, I pried the box open with tools from my apartment maintenance kit. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Dad's actual will, notarized and dated just 6 months prior, leaving the business to his longtime foreman Mike, the house to be sold with proceeds split between me and Dad's favorite veterans charity, and Mom's jewelry explicitly left to me. There was also a handwritten letter. Lizzie, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I don't trust Cynthia anymore. I've discovered financial irregularities in both personal and business accounts. She's been moving money, lots of it. When I confronted her, she gave explanations that didn't add up. I'm meeting with our family lawyer, Richard Simmons, next week to change everything. Stay safe. I love you. Dad. The date on the letter was 3 days before his death. I took everything to Richard Simmons the next morning. His face grew grim as he examined the documents. This will is legitimate, he confirmed, and I never met with your father about a new will. The one Cynthia presented was notarized by someone I don't recognize. Elizabeth, this is serious, fraud at minimum. What should I do? I asked. We need more evidence. Right now, it's her word against documents that could be argued were outdated or superseded. Over the next months, I lived a double life. On the surface, I appeared to accept Cynthia's version of events. I visited occasionally, pretending to mend fences, while secretly working with Richard and a private investigator. We discovered Cynthia had a history of relationships with wealthy older men, name changes, and suspicious financial activities in 3 different states. We need access to your father's computer and financial records, the PI told me. Without them, we only have circumstantial evidence. The opportunity came during the 1-year memorial service Cynthia organized at the country club. A tasteful affair where she'd invited all the right people, Dad's business associates, her social circle, and a few token childhood friends of his who barely recognized the commemorative photo display of a life she'd rewritten.
I'm so glad you could make it, Cynthia air-kissed my cheeks when I arrived. She was already remarried to Gregory Porter, a real estate developer 20 years her senior. Gregory and I were just discussing turning your father's old company into a boutique development firm. How nice, I managed. Is it okay if I visit Dad's office during the reception? I'd like a moment alone with his things. She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. Of course, darling, though we've packed most of it away. While guests mingled over canapes and champagne, I slipped into Dad's home office.
Most personal items were gone, replaced by Gregory's golf trophies and business awards. I found Dad's laptop in the bottom drawer of his desk, password still the same, my name and birth year. I quickly downloaded his financial records and emails onto a flash drive, heart racing each time footsteps passed the door. As I was about to leave, I noticed something odd about the bookshelf. Dad's prized first edition Hemingway collection was missing. He'd collected them piece by piece over decades, often skipping other luxuries to afford a rare find. Cynthia had once called them dusty old books taking up space. I texted the PI, check high-end book auctions from the past year. Back at the reception, Cynthia was holding court, describing how devoted my father had been to her. In those final days, he was so concerned about my future without him. She dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I watched her perform grief while wearing Mom's sapphire pendant, the one Dad gave Mom on their 10th anniversary. Something inside me snapped. "That's a beautiful necklace," I said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "It looks just like the one my dad gave my mother before she died." The room grew quiet. Cynthia's hand flew to the pendant. "Yes, your father wanted me to have it. He said it matched my eyes better than it ever matched hers." Several of Mom's old friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. Cynthia quickly changed the subject, steering me away from the group. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Just admiring my mother's jewelry," I replied calmly. "The jewelry Dad explicitly left to me in his actual will." Her perfect mask slipped for just a second. "I don't know what you think you found, but treading this path would be extremely unwise, Elizabeth." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Your father and I had private conversations you know nothing about. Who do you think people will believe? The grieving widow who nursed him through illness, or the estranged daughter who barely visited?" That night, I received a text from the PI. "Hemingway collections sold at Sotheby's 3 months after your father's death, $430,000. Seller, Cynthia Bennett." The final piece came 2 days later. Richard Simmons called. "The notary on the fraudulent will? She's confessing. Says Cynthia paid her $25,000 to backdate and notarize a document your father never signed." We took everything to the district attorney. The investigation took 18 months. 18 months of watching Cynthia spend my father's money, run his business into the ground, and sell off pieces of his life. 18 months of her subtle psychological warfare, calling mutual friends to express concern about my mental health, sending condescending birthday cards with token checks to help with your finances, even dating the renovations on Dad's house to erase any trace of our family's existence. But finally, the DA had enough. Bank records showed Cynthia had transferred over $2 million from Dad's accounts in the weeks before and immediately after his death. The forensic accountant found evidence she'd been siphoning funds from his business for years. The notary had fully cooperated, providing text messages and banking details. And most damning, the medical examiner had reopened the case and found inconsistencies in Dad's medication levels. The day Cynthia was arrested at a charity luncheon where she was receiving an award for philanthropic excellence was the first time I felt any sense of justice. Her perfect image, carefully curated through strategic donations and social climbing, began to crumble as charges were filed. Fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and potential second-degree murder pending further investigation. The trial lasted 3 weeks.
I sat silently through it all, watching Cynthia's performance as the misunderstood widow, the victim of a jealous stepdaughter's vendetta. Her new husband, Gregory, had already filed for annulment, claiming he'd been deceived about her past. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts except murder, which remained under investigation, Cynthia showed no reaction. Her attorney immediately requested leniency based on her contributions to the community and lack of prior convictions under her current identity. That's when I was called to deliver my victim impact statement. I approached the podium, my hands steady for the first time in years. The courtroom was packed. Dad's old friends, business associates, Mom's sister who had flown in from Oregon, even my college roommate. "Your Honor," I began, "I'm here today not just for myself, but for my father, Thomas Bennett."
A man who built something meaningful through honesty and hard work, only to have it stolen along with his dignity. I looked directly at Cynthia. Her attorney had dressed her in a modest navy suit, pearls at her throat instead of my mother's sapphires. My father was not a perfect man, but he was a good one. He taught me that your word is your bond, and that family means standing by each other through hardship. Cynthia Bennett didn't just steal his money or forge his will. She stole his legacy and rewrote his story. I pulled out the letter from Dad's lockbox, now preserved as evidence. My father knew something was wrong. He tried to protect what he'd built, what he wanted to leave behind. His final act was an attempt to reveal the truth, but he ran out of time. Cynthia finally showed emotion, a flash of genuine hatred in her eyes. "The financial losses can be calculated, Your Honor. The property can be returned or repaid. But some things are irreplaceable. I lost my chance to say goodbye to my father. I lost the keepsakes of my mother that he had preserved for me. I lost 18 months of my life to fighting for justice instead of properly grieving." I unfolded a second piece of paper. "I'd also like to read something else, if the court permits. This is the last birthday card my father gave me, 3 months before he died." The judge nodded. "Lizzie," I read, "as you turn 32, I realize I've watched you grow into everything your mother and I hoped for, strong, kind, and true to yourself. No matter what happens with my health, know that you've been my greatest achievement and joy. The business, the house, they're just things. But you're our legacy. Everything I have is already yours in all the ways that matter. Love always, Dad." My voice broke on the final words. The courtroom was completely silent. Cynthia Bennett didn't just commit fraud, Your Honor. She tried to erase my father's true wishes and intentions. She tried to rewrite his love. That is the real crime here, and no sentence can fully address it. As I returned to my seat, Cynthia stood up suddenly. "She's lying," she shouted, her carefully constructed poise finally shattering completely. "Tom wanted me to have everything. He told me his daughter was a disappointment. That letter is a forgery." The judge called for order as Cynthia's attorney tried to restrain her. "You were nothing to him," she hissed at me across the courtroom. "Just an obligation. He told me—" "Miss Bennett, control yourself or you will be removed," the judge warned. In that moment, watching her unravel, I realized the truth. My father had never said those things. Her reaction wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the story she'd convinced herself was real. A story where she was entitled to everything she took, where her actions were justified. The judge sentenced her to 20 years. As they led Cynthia away, she locked eyes with me one final time. All pretense gone, all masks dropped. For the first time, I was seeing the real Cynthia Bennett. And in that moment, I felt not victory, but a profound sadness for the emptiness that must drive someone to build their life on destroying others. The aftermath was like standing in the rubble after a hurricane. Devastation everywhere, but also a strange clarity. Dad's business had been gutted, valuable contracts lost, loyal employees scattered to other companies.
The house had been mortgaged to its limit, the equity extracted and transferred to offshore accounts the FBI was still tracing. My mother's jewelry had been sold piece by piece, though we managed to recover the sapphire pendant from an auction house in Chicago. "It's going to be complicated," Richard warned me as we sat in his office reviewing the financial damage. "Criminal conviction doesn't automatically restore everything. We'll need separate civil proceedings." "I don't care about the money," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "I just want what Dad actually wanted." The following months were a blur of legal meetings, forensic accountants, and painful discoveries. Cynthia had apparently targeted my father after researching successful business owners in Connecticut who were widowers. There were notebooks detailing his routines, preferences, even a list of his vulnerabilities. Mentions daughter frequently, still wears wedding ring, sentimental about family traditions. Most disturbing was finding evidence that she'd deliberately isolated him from friends and family in his final months, screening calls and manipulating his medication schedule to keep him disoriented. The murder investigation remained open, but proving intent beyond reasonable doubt would be difficult given the time that had passed.
Mike Martinez, Dad's longtime foreman, who should have inherited the business according to the real will, had started his own company after being pushed out by Cynthia. "Your dad was the best boss I ever had," he told me over coffee at the diner where Dad used to take contractors for lunch meetings. "He talked about you constantly, kept your college graduation picture right on his desk." "I wish I'd been around more," I admitted, "especially at the end." Mike shook his head. "She made sure nobody was around. Classic abuser tactic. Your dad was a proud man, probably didn't want you to see him being controlled like that." We decided to use what remained of the business assets to start a small foundation in Dad's name, providing scholarships for students entering construction trades. It felt right, continuing his legacy of building things that would last. The house sold quickly once the legal issues were resolved. Standing in the empty rooms before closing, I ran my hands along the kitchen door frame where Dad had marked my height every birthday until I left for college. Cynthia had painted over the marks, but pressing my fingers against the wood, I could still feel the indentations. In the garage, I found one last surprise, a dusty shoebox hidden in the ceiling insulation containing old family photos Cynthia hadn't discovered. Pictures of Mom and Dad on their honeymoon, my awkward elementary school portraits, the three of us at Fenway Park wearing matching Red Sox caps. These were the real treasures, more valuable than anything else that had been taken. The hardest part was forgiving myself, for not seeing through Cynthia sooner, for not being there when Dad needed me, for the months I'd wasted on anger and revenge rather than healing. "You were up against a professional con artist," my therapist reminded me, someone who had spent decades perfecting her manipulation techniques. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Gregory Porter, Cynthia's ex-husband. He was dying of pancreatic cancer and wanted to make amends. "I should have realized sooner," he wrote. "Cynthia, or whatever her real name is, did the same thing to me she did to your father, isolated me from my children, began changing my will. Your courage in standing up to her likely saved my life." He invited me to visit, and when I did, I found a frail man surrounded by his adult children who had recently reconciled with him. "She had a pattern," his daughter explained. "We tried to warn your father once when we saw them together at a charity event. She intercepted us, threatened to have us removed." Gregory had one more revelation. A storage unit rented under his company name where Cynthia had kept trophies from previous cons. Among them, incredibly, was my mother's jewelry box. Not everything was there, but I found her wedding ring and the charm bracelet Dad had given her on their first anniversary. "She likes keeping pieces," Gregory explained, "souvenirs of her victories." The FBI used the contents of the storage unit to reopen cases in 3 other states, eventually identifying at least 4 other victims of similar schemes. Cynthia's real name, it turned out, was Margaret Wilson, from a small town in Nevada. She'd left home at 17 and created her first false identity by 19.
The most unexpected development came a year after the trial. I was volunteering at a legal aid clinic. My experience had inspired me to start law school when a young woman approached me. "Are you Elizabeth Bennett?" she asked tentatively. "The one from this Cynthia Bennett case?" She was in her early 20s, with Cynthia's distinctive blue eyes. "My name is Rachel Wilson," she said. "Cynthia, Margaret, is my mother. I haven't seen her since I was 7 when she left me with my grandmother." Over coffee, Rachel shared her story. She'd been following the case from afar, recognizing her mother in the news coverage. "I spent my whole life wondering why she left. What was wrong with me?" Rachel confessed. "Seeing the trial made me realize it was never about me. There was something broken in her long before I was born." We formed an unlikely bond, two women trying to make sense of the damage one person had caused. Rachel had none of her mother's manipulative traits. She was studying to be a nurse, caring for her elderly grandmother, living a life built on genuine connection rather than exploitation. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's death, I visited his grave with freshly caught fish instead of flowers, an inside joke from our fishing trips. I told him about the foundation, about law school, about Rachel.
I apologized for not protecting him better and thanked him for the lessons that had ultimately helped me bring Cynthia to justice. As I was leaving, I noticed an elderly couple placing flowers at a nearby grave. The woman looked up and recognition dawned on her face. "You're Tom Bennett's daughter, aren't you?" she asked. "I'm Eleanor Simmons, Richard's wife. Your father was such a dear friend to us." We chatted briefly, and as they were leaving, Eleanor pressed something into my hand, a faded photograph. "Richard found this in some old files. Thought you might want to have it." It was a picture I'd never seen before. Dad and Mom at Richard's retirement party years ago, their heads bent together, laughing at some private joke. They looked so happy, so completely themselves. That photo now sits on my desk at law school, a reminder that beyond the legal cases and financial settlements, beyond the justice and restitution, there are the stories we choose to preserve. The real legacy isn't in wills or property or even businesses. It's in the truth of who someone was, in the love they gave, in the lives they touched. Cynthia couldn't steal that, no matter how hard she tried. Today, 4 years after that courtroom confrontation, I still carry Dad's letter in my wallet, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder of what really matters. The foundation has funded 37 scholarships. Rachel and I meet monthly for coffee. I'm finishing law school, focusing on elder law and fraud protection. Life has found its rhythm again. Sometimes people ask if I regret staying silent for so long, letting Cynthia believe she'd won before building my case. I don't. That patience, that strategic thinking, it came from Dad. "Measure twice, cut once," he always said. In waiting, I found not just justice, but truth, and ultimately, peace. We all face moments when someone tries to rewrite our story, when what we know to be true is challenged by someone else's convenient fiction. In those moments, remember, the truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes it whispers, waiting for the right moment to be heard. If my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel where we share stories of resilience and justice. Hit the like button if you believe in the power of patience and truth. And remember, no one can rewrite your story unless you hand them the pen.